Taylor had me do the scene with Miklo, where I tell him, and he brought me aside and he said,
and is that Damien Chapa at that point?
This is Damien Chapa. Yes, he's already been cast.
Yeah.
And he said to me, I want to know what this kid has inside of him. So do me a favor, get me something out of him. And so as we were doing the scene, dialogue verbatim, all of a sudden, when he got to feeling sorry for himself, I literally grabbed him and I slapped him. Actually slapped him in the audition.
Wow. Welcome to More Than a Movie, a podcast that gives you a behind-the-scenes look at your favorite movies. I'm your host, Alex Fumero. Last season, we did a deep dive on American Me. This season, I'll focus on a different movie each episode, feature interviews with the biggest actors, directors, writers, and producers behind them, and tap into the history of Latinos in film. But last season, we did a deep dive on a movie called American Me. It was directed by Edward James Olmos, and it's centered on a Mexican prison gang in the Los Angeles neighborhood of Boyle Heights. It bears a startling resemblance to a film that would come out only 1 year later, Blood In, Blood Out, directed by Taylor Hackford. In fact, we only came to know about the drama surrounding American Me, the murders of 3 of the film's gang consultants, because of the stories Danny Trejo told about the movie. A movie he claims he rejected a part in because a leader of La M told him it would be a bad look. Instead, he took the role of Geronimo in Blood In, Blood Out, and the rest is history. Nobody was killed in connection with Blood In, Blood Out because the Vatos Locos weren't a real prison gang. And the story, while inspired by real gang life, was fictionalized sufficiently as to not draw the ire of real-life gangs. Director Taylor Hackford, who was in a previous episode of this podcast, left the door open for us to speak to him about the movie, but to date, we haven't been able to lock him down. Danny Trejo outright declined our multiple attempts for interview. It's impossible to know why, but it's conceivable that it has something to do with the subject of our first season. But who we do have are 2 of the stars of the movie Blood In, Blood Out. Jesse Borrego, who played Cruz, and Enrique Castillo, who played Montana. And to this day, despite long acting careers, it's probably the movie they're best known for. So we will start with the man behind the troubled artist known as Cruz, the heart and soul of this movie. And I'll let him introduce himself personally. If I asked, who is Jesse Borrego, what would the answer be?
That's a good question. The chameleon. I was once called the most versatile actor of our time. When that time was, I don't know, but Jesse Borrego, the performer, Jesse Borrego, the advocate for cultural authenticity, Jesse Borrego, the storyteller. So I think that's how people know me. I started in the theater, in el teatro del barrio with the Chicanos. Was raised in the Chicano culture, developed my indigenous identity, and above all, tried to exemplify that in all the characters that I played. People ask me, why did Cruz impact people so much? And I tell them because as an artist, as an actor, I was at the top of my game. Taylor knew me from the auditions at La Bamba, and he approached me and said, hey, we're doing this film, Blood In, Blood Out. You need to be in it, and you need to help me cast the Vatos Locos. So I took that very seriously as the de facto mascot of the film. And I really felt that a lot of the passion that we put in it as artists, between all of us from top to bottom, from Taylor to Jimmy Baca to the performers, we really put all of that love of our cultura in there. And I think that's how people recognize me, as a champion of the cultura,
Well, yeah, and people may not realize just what a big role you played in whatever you want to call it, the authenticity, the verisimilitude of those guys, like why they felt like they were from where they were from. This is the 30th anniversary year of the film's premiere.
Mhm.
And in the LA Times profile recently written about the film, Benjamin Bratt gives you a lot of love. He says, if I attained any degree of success in my portrayal within this film, a great deal of the credit has to go to what I learned from Jesse Borrego, not only about the notion of carnalismo, but about what it means to be a true and giving artist as an actor. What do you think about that?
Oh, that man always had that. And, one of the things we did when Taylor taxed me with finding the Vatos Locos is we had a little theater camp. The auditions were like theater. And I told Taylor, I said, look, I'm going to be down. I'm going to be in the barrio. So if these actors can't hang, you're going to know right away, right? Basically trial by fire, Chicano fire, right? And so I threw slang at them. I threw all kinds of stuff. And one of the things that really impressed me about Benjamin is not only his ability to transform himself as an actor, but also to be able to find that authentic root of what that character is. And I thought he did that incredibly well in Paco. And I'm always impressed by the performances, but I really, really felt that you could see Benjamin's artistry. I mean, Paco was such an immersive character, and it literally, like the Damien character, had to go night and day. So I think between the three of us, we really tried to not only be authentic to what these characters were, but we tried to do the best job that we could as performers and as actors.
Maybe you can clarify this a little bit, Jesse, but you were saying like Taylor put you in charge of sort of vetting the Vatos Locos as an actor? Like, that's unusual. How does that work?
Taylor Hackford understood that I was more than just a one-dimensional film actor. He knew me from my work on television, but he also knew that I was theatrically trained. He also knew that I was culturally authentic. And so I think for him, it was important, not only with the writer Jimmy Santiago Baca being truly Chicano and putting his experience in the script, he needed an anchor for the performances. And I think he trusted me with that. And he also knew that I was a filmmaker and that I understood the process. I understood the big picture, right? I couldn't really help him in a lot of the work that he was going to have to do at San Quentin and with Damien. But he knew that in terms of the Vatos Locos, that I could really create some sort of wonderful synergy between the three of us. And that was the innocence that we were going to start to break throughout the rest of the film. I always tell the story that we stayed, he had the actor stay in the neighborhood, City Terrace neighborhood, with the Garrity Loma boys. So we were there with one of the clicas of East LA, one of the well-known ones. And they were so wonderful to us. They took care of us. They were like our de facto bodyguards. Some of the younger ones became extras in the film. But by staying with them those few weeks, I was able to focus Benjamin and Damien and me into this kind of a camaraderie that people would believe that we grew up together, but that we also grew up Chicanos, that we grew up in this East LA, specific East Los neighborhood. So I think for me, it was an honor. And like I said, I knew Taylor, so I was very excited about making his vision come to fruition. And I thought that he was very, very smart in who he was unifying with him in this vision. And I thought that Jimmy Santiago Baca, as a writer, was giving us, call him Chicano Shakespeare, right? That he was writing Chicano Shakespeare. So it was wonderful to be able to take this lingo, take the slang, authenticate it with my boys, with my actors, and create, the true root of Vatos Locos, which was that innocence. And I really felt that that's what I was going to be able to bring to it through the artistry, right? Because I was the cultured one, right? I was the artist. But I was also the one that constantly was in danger of being eliminated because I wasn't a fighter, because I wasn't Paco, because I didn't have this chip on my shoulder like Miklo. And so I think then when you see his tragic fall, Cosito's tragic fall, it speaks a lot to an experience that I know because it happened in my family of art and culture and love in someone from the barrio being totally destroyed by the societal pressures. And I think that was the theme that we wanted to touch on before Damien went into prison, because then you understand why that happens and why the syndicates are formed and why there's this kind of dark side to our Chicano culture,
See, this is one of the things I love about this movie and about the cast that's involved. For most people, I think you watch this movie and you're like, this is like a Boys in the Hood kind of movie, like, there's a bunch of gangsters, da-da-da. There is this weaving of this social consciousness throughout it.
I think that's the dilemma of urbanized Chicano culture, is that, we have all of these influences and these traditions that come from our Mexicanidad, that comes from our Mexican-American roots growing up in the border and in these states that were our culture. So there's this kind of unspoken tragedy that we're still living as second-class citizens in our land, right? It was ours as indigenous people, but then as Hispanos, and then as Mexicanos. And I think when you see the chip on the shoulder that a lot of these vatos have in their cultural pride, right? Because there is a kind of a chip on the shoulder, man. There's a kind of an edge to how we carry our culture and our pride. And that's because we understand that we have not been honored and that our contributions have not been shared and treasured the way that other cultures have in this side of the border. So, it was something that I think America has constantly struggled with. And we as Chicanos, we carry that with us. And so when they see that in our culture and our way of being, it rubs them raw, There is no justification of Chicano culture, right? We did it first. In the film, Taylor said, this is something that needs to be talked about. And so I think he knew that we as actors, me, Kiki, all of us were going to bring that unspoken history into our characters. And the other thing that was beautiful about Jimmy Baca and Taylor Hackford is they allowed those of us that were the real Chicanos to improvise. So if we felt that there was an unspoken something, they allowed us to elaborate on that and put it into the words of our character appropriately. And I thought that was so giving as artists, especially in a film world where everything's like, don't do this, don't do that, don't cross that line. The collaborative effort really allowed us as Chicano actors to exemplify these characters and to bring the beauty and the joy and the honor of the Chicano culture, And I think that's why it's endured for 30 years.
There were even scenes that were rewritten because of that kind of deference or that kind of inclusion, right? Can you talk a little bit about how things were kind of like changed on the fly in order to make the film feel more authentic to the Chicano experience?
Well, that speaks to the artistry of Jimmy Santiago Baca as the writer, but also everybody that Taylor chose to collaborate with him in this vision, He knew that if he got the right artists in the right positions, that at some point, if there was a color that was missing, if there was a moment, if there was something that needed to be said, that they were going to allow for that they were going to really, really trust our instincts. And that's why I tell you, all praise and honor to Taylor, because when he approached me, that was one of the things that he really made clear. He goes, look, I'm going to trust you on this. So when we go to these auditions and we look for these vato locos, I want you to really, really, really try to see who connects with you. And from there, really try to find those artists that are going to honor these characters in this story. And so I think it was the same way all the way through the line. They trusted me with that. They trusted a lot of the artists that he put in those positions to authenticate that. And I think the beauty of it, and, Taylor always talks about that. He says it's one of the best films he ever made. And yet it's one of the least successful of his films because of the backup of our parent studio company.
I mean, part of the reason it wasn't more of a runaway success was because of the LA riots, right? I mean, the LA riots happened in 1992.
I don't think that would have made a difference. I really do think that it was what you call the perfect storm, right? You had the controversy with the other film, American Me First, which had released a year earlier. You had the delay, right? As Taylor was trying to convince, they talk about this mythical 5-hour cut. Have you ever heard about that?
No, tell me about it.
There's apparently a 5-hour cut Taylor had first screened to Disney, right? Because he had he had 10 years of these guys' lives. So he had 3 movies in this one. But really what Taylor was trying to do was Godfather 1 and Godfather 2. We always had that plan in mind. It was such a huge story that it made sense. Well, Taylor had pretty much shot enough for 2 films. But as the controversy with the other films started to happen, as they started to back off of it, as we saw the Rodney King trial finishing up, there was this unease in LA. Well, with all of that happening, Taylor screened this 5-hour version for the studio. He wanted to convince them that he had enough for 2. It was there. They, of course, at that point said, look, we don't even know if we're going to put out 1. And at that point, he realized that he was going to have to try and finish the 1. So that's at the point that they rethought it and said, look, well, we have to finish the 1 because they'd been screening it for 6 months, previewing it with different people. We'd already gone through a press junket. And so I think they kind of realized that the film was open-ended because they wanted to lead to part 2. So at that point, they realized, well, should anything happen, we need to know that we have a film. So at that point, they rewrote the end. They came back 6 months later and said, look, we're going to reshoot the end of the film. And I thought it was brilliant.
The end of the film being your scene with Benjamin Bratt?
With Benjamin, with the river. And I think at that point, Taylor realized, okay, if we're not going to do a part 2, then we really have to make sure that part 1 or the film ends, right? And so I think at that point, Jimmy went back, retooled the scene, same setup, but now you have the development of the argument between Crucito and Paco. And when you watch that scene and you watch this man who has built his entire identity on this macho character that never gives in, actually break down because he realizes that he caused all of that. It is such a poignant moment, and it just cleans up this beautiful film, and that's why they love it. And you know, again, the brilliance of Jimmy to be able to take that original scene and retool it, right, in such a beautiful, perfect way. We were able to end this incredible film and our incredible performances in this way. It just speaks again to the brilliance and the synergy of that team that Taylor Hackford brought together, you know.
There is a brilliant synergy between this ad that you're about to hear and my bank account, so please listen at 0.5x. We'll be right back. Welcome back to More Than a Movie. I am not more than a host, Alex Fumero. We're back with Jesse Borrego, who is telling us what it was like behind the scenes working on a movie with a bunch of Latino guys back in the early 90s. Something that is rare even today. You know, one thing I noticed at the end of the movie, it is sad, but then you start sort of like messing with him about like el gallo negro. And it's like very fun, like you're very funny. Like it's a very short segment, but you're very funny in that last minute. And it made me go, made me think like, is this kind of what it was like behind the scenes? Like obviously you were dealing with heavy subject matter and actors have to prepare and all that stuff. But like, what was some of the camaraderie like behind the scenes of making the movie? Because it's not a lot of times that a bunch of young Latino dudes, get to all hang out together on set. Like if that's your career, you're very lucky.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering like, were y'all just fucking with each other all the time, or what was that like?
All the time. We had to keep each other in the groove, and that was great about the ensemble cast. When we did the auditions, especially when they started bringing in the Vatos Locos and more actors to kind of audition for the Vato Loco parts. In the minute Valente walked in, I knew he was right? Mm. And me and him started spitting in Chicano slang right away. So there was a kind of an understanding there of who we were. And then you bring in a brilliant actor like Raymond Cruz, whose uncles are from that scene. And he was able to channel a lot of that into his true character. Now you've got this wonderful ensemble cast. And so we felt that we had to constantly push the envelope and push each other. So we were always playing jokes on each other. And once we got going and Benjamin and Damien caught on, I think it really gave them a very authentic route to start to work their particular plot journeys on. And I think hanging out at that neighborhood in Garrity Loma, the beautiful familia that took care of us there, I kept telling this to the actors. I go, look around, listen to the way they're talking, listen to their slang, right? This is modern East Los in the 90s, but they've retained a lot of the rhythms, man. They've retained a lot of the slang of the Caló. So don't be afraid to talk to them, relate to them, ask them questions. And more than anything, I thought that Benjamin really embraced that. I remember the first weekend we were there, Raymond, right, came up to us and said, hey, listen, we have Gang Youth Services is handing out Easter baskets down at the local park, Hazard Park. You think the actors want to go down there and hand them out? And I looked at the other actors and I said, this is great. It's a great opportunity. One, the neighborhood's going to see us, so they're going to see us hanging around here for a few weeks. I go, second, I want you guys to pay attention. You know, this is actor 101 right here. The vatos, their slang, cómo se paran, cómo se miran. So I think that, and Benjamin wound up hanging out all day, all night. He was there as with the vatos, trying to absorb them, trying to figure out their slang, asking questions. You know, this is the work that an actor really, really loves. But when you embrace it like that, you know, you're showing love for the cultura. You're showing love for the familia. So as an actor, a chance to portray these characters
that you grew up around, that you like idolized, right? For better, for worse, right?
Yeah. Benjamin was always worried about that because when Taylor wanted him to take his character all the way to the Vendido side, you know, Benjamin had a really hard time with it. He goes, no, you know, this is such a wonderful, authentic character. But then he realized as a storyteller and as an actor, oh, I get it. He needs to go all the way that way, right? And then you come back and you hear those beautiful lines that Jimmy wrote for him that he says, you don't know anything about being Chicano. You know, it's our people out there struggling, surviving, working. That's what being Chicano is about. And I'm like, bro, you're the Chicano in this movie, homie. So I think even though he's Peruano, even though, you know, he's multicultural, you know, for him, it was important to be authentic. For him, it was important to have a cultural identity in Paco that he could really touch on, you know. He should have been nominated. If that would have been a studio film, he would have been right up there in the nomination. We were supposed to win awards. From what I know of the business, I knew what was going to get awards. And I saw the energy. I saw the pedigree, right, from Taylor Hackford all the way on down. So I just saw so many awards and nominations. All we needed to do was have that great couple of weeks that these studios judge everything by, right? And we were headed that way.
And what do you think, what got in the way?
Two things happened. The other film beat us to the punch. And I think it was correct for Taylor to say, we're not ready. So we're not going to get into this competition about which one is better. They're two different films, same kind of theme, two different films. Let them have their day. We were there. At the same time, with that delay, all the bad publicity of the reaction, right, to the other film, boom. Then that's when Eisner started to get scared. Then you have all this unrest. Then you have the riots. And I think at that point, they were already backing off to finishing the second part. They were already backing off the project itself. And I think once that happened, they said, it's going straight to VHS, is what they told me. And at that point, Taylor had to start fighting for the theatrical release that they had promised him. So I can't imagine that Taylor didn't ream them a couple of times because that's how much and passionate he was about this film. I mean, he was the de facto general. So always, whenever we doubted ourselves, we looked up. You know, Carlos Carrasco, who played Popeye, tells this incredible story about when they went to San Quentin to film. He told us that Taylor had these, these juntas with all of the actors and said, look, stick together, all this stuff. Well, when they got there with all of the maximum security that they had to go through, they got into the prison. And the first scene that they're going to film is the big scene with all of the inmates at the cafeteria. That's the first thing they're filming. So they're looking around going, oh my God. He goes, so there we were, all 12 of us clicking together. All of the talks that we'd had, all the tutorials went out the window. And we're sitting there because the cacophony was unreal. He says the cacophony, you could not hear yourself talking to the person in front of you. And that was standard, right? He goes, so we did not know how we were going to start filming because it was just so crazy. Well, next thing you know, Taylor gets up and without a bullhorn starts letting everyone know, pay attention, everybody, into director mode with a director voice. And Carlos goes, it was amazing. But all of these inmates who were not actors, all of the sudden became quiet actors paying attention to their director.
Yeah.
He goes, that's when we knew we had it. That's when we knew that Maestro had our back, el mero mero. And then we were able to do our work, which was to become these characters, which was to make it seem like we were raised in San Quentin. So that story tells you the type of leadership that we had. And I think Taylor passed that on. You know, we were his captains. He was the general. We were his captains.
What's the deal with the name change? Blood In, Blood Out, Bound by Honor. Was that part of this controversy around like the release of the film?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So we had done the press junket for about 3 months as Blood In, Blood Out. So we had been promoting this film as Blood In, Blood Out. Right about the time that all this controversy came up and we were going to try and screen and we were waiting to hear when, Taylor comes up to me and says, oh, by the way, we're changing the title. And I said, what? I go, Taylor, you realize we've been promoting it as one name. He goes, I know. He goes, but the only way they're going to let me have a theatrical is if we change the name. And when he told me the name, truthfully, I said, Taylor, it sounds like a military film, right? And he goes, yeah, but out of all the titles, this is the only one that we could pull off. He said, and don't worry, once we get it out to the audience, the name will go back. And sure enough, when it went back to VHS, they changed it back to Blood In, Blood Out. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting that they didn't want the Chicano audience to go to the theater and make it a success, but they did want them to rent it on VHS.
I've heard people say that this is like the most, I mean, people always make claims like this, but that this is one of the most pirated movies of all time, basically, because in the hood, they would just be copying VHSs of this thing just to get their hands on it.
When I see Latin American fans and they hear my voice, it blows them away. They go, wow, this film is 30 years old. I'm in the middle of the hills of Michoacan, and this man knows my face, my voice, my performance, and is excited by it. We didn't win the awards, but the award I get is that my raza got to see it, my cultura got to enjoy it, and the world gets to share it. And I think that's the best giveaway I think about this film, is that it did survive, you know, the attempt to squash it. It did survive the attempt to make it inactive. And I think that all of that is that passion that we put into it. There was no way that seed was not going to sprout and grow and flower, no matter how much dirt they put on it. So I think that's really the best takeaway of Blood In, Blood Out, is that more than 30 years, you're talking about generations.
Well, Jesse Borrego, I think that's a great place to end. I really want to thank you for being here and honoring this film on its 30th anniversary year, man. So congratulations, and I wish you even more success.
Thank you, brother. And thanks for supporting us all these years. Vatos Locos forever.
So now you've met the artist behind the artist, known as Cruz. But no Blood In, Blood Out episode would be complete without meeting the leader of La Onda, the one they call Montana, who, as it turns out, wasn't so much a real gangster as a real thespian. Let me introduce him to you. More Than a Movie is really a podcast about not just like the behind the scenes of filmmaking, but like what it was like to live making these movies, right? And the lives behind the movies themselves, to put people kind of in the shoes of what it was like to be there before you made El Norte, or before you made Bound by Honor, Blood In, Blood Out, or before you made Mi Familia, right? But in order to do that, let's start at the beginning. So, Enrique Castillo, why don't you tell our audience, who is Enrique Castillo?
I grew up as a farm worker. I grew up in a border town, Calexico, California, which is unique because it's a combination of two words, right? California and Mexico, Calexico.
Yeah.
And on the Mexican side is Mexicali, Mexico, and Mexico in California.
Yeah.
So I basically grew up in a lower class family. You know, we all had to work for a living as families in the summers. My father lived his life as a farm worker. I worked with him in the fields, orchards, from the time I could walk to my sophomore year at UC Berkeley, which is where I met Luis Valdez,
Wow.
who created El Teatro Campesino, and that led me on the course to bring me to LA.
I'd love to know, you know, you meet Luis. I'd love to know what your experience was like working with Teatro Campesino.
Well, it was incredible. I met Luis when I was a student at Berkeley. And I had wanted to consider having a career as an actor in LA. And a counselor in the department told me that somebody was coming to teach theater who had connections with Hollywood. And that person turned out to be Luis Valdez. And we hit it off right away. I mean, it was not like a professor and student. We were more like friends.
How old around was Luis at that time? He hadn't done Zoot Suit the movie yet? Or
Had not. No. This was the early stages of the move that he made from Delano to San Juan Bautista. And there was a complex there with a huge patio. And there was a very small theater that they had there. So he took over that complex from the owner. I believe it was like 1969. And then he invited people from different teatros that were created across the country to come and workshop in San Juan Bautista. And we created a production, which was the original Los Corridos, that eventually ended up on PBS with Linda Ronstadt and Danny Valdez's brother playing music. We did a lot of improvisation, and Luis created several pieces out of it. And then we brought that production to Los Angeles. And as a result, it won the LA Drama Critics Award.
Wow.
And actually, that was my first offer from Hollywood, which we eventually ended up turning down because, of course, we didn't want to have anything to do with Hollywood.
What was the offer?
As it was told to me,
Yeah.
because I was not there when it was presented, it was producers from Paramount Studios that come to see the production, and they came backstage and they asked for me. And they were doing a production called The New Centurions by Joseph Wambaugh. And it starred Stacy Keach, I believe, and the role was the role of a police officer that ended up actually being cast with Eric Estrada.
No. Amazing.
And of course, he went and springboarded onto Chips probably from there.
I mean, that's such an interesting alternate dimension where you make one different choice and you are the guy from Chips. It's like a totally different career. You could have been Dos Mujeres Un Camino, right?
The thing was, at that time about Hollywood, I had a chip on my shoulder.
Yeah, you were like, fuck this stuff. Yeah. So talk to me about the transition to LA. How do you go from this, I'm sort of traveling the world with a bunch of wonderful, eccentric theater artists who are changing the world. Mexican gypsies. I love that. Traveling the world with a bunch of Mexican theater gypsies. And then you land in Los Angeles. How does that happen?
I made the move to LA in July of 1978 without knowing anybody. I didn't have an agent. I didn't know anybody. And then I went to David Alexander's Acting Academy, and that's where I met an actor, Pepe Serna.
Oh, wow. Legend.
Yes. And Pepe had been in the workshop of Zoot Suit, written and directed by Luis Valdez. And he told me that he had just done that workshop production and they were probably going to do it again. So there were going to be some roles available. And most people are too young to recall that at that time in 1978, there were answering services, real people answering the phone for you and taking messages.
Yeah.
So with encouragement from the very few people that I knew, including Pepe, I went to an audition at the Mark Taper Forum and I reacquainted with Luis. And after my audition, I went home, and for the weekend, I went back up to San Jose to visit family. When I got back, called in the answering service, and the person said, yeah, you got a message. They said, oh, yes, Luis has been waiting for you to call. And so that's how I got my first job in L.A.
So your first job in LA was Zoot Suit?
Was Zoot Suit. So I moved here in July, auditioned, and in August, I was working already. And the play ran successfully for a year. So I had work for a year, which time I was able to secure an agent. And my first TV job was on The Incredible Hulk.
So for the few maniacs that actually listen to every single episode of this podcast, Zoot Suit is like this. It's like a ghost that haunts us. Like, I can't tell you how many actors, obviously Luis, but like every actor either in season 1 and season 2 either saw Zoot Suit and that inspired them to become actors, were in a production of Zoot Suit, and that was like their break into Hollywood, or in Luis's case, just made Zoot Suit, you know?
It's the blood in, blood out or American Me of its time.
That's right. Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, though, I don't know if you could cast Blood in, Blood Out or American Me if Zoot Suit hadn't done what it did, because you sort of needed, created a little army of actors in order to fill those roles.
That can actually be, we're always kidding each other about it, Santana and Montana, right? Yeah. and both of us played leads in Zoot Suit.
Yeah, Santana and Montana. Ha ha ha. Yes, they played the same characters, and both movies were so similar, except for those actual real-life murders that happened. Anywho, here's a commercial break. Welcome back to More Than a Movie, and my guest, Enrique Castillo, who is about to tell us how he went from black box thespian to playing a notorious gangster. So finally, I mean, how does Blood in, Blood Out happen for you?
Well, they were just like anything else. I went and auditioned. So I was called in for the audition, and I was probably the last person to come in for the audition. They had already cast all of the other Onda leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went into the audition, and I sat across like this from the casting director. And the casting director was kind of taking minimal interest in me. And he asked me if I had a photograph that I could leave. And I had a portfolio, actually. And I had a series of pictures in there. And one of the pictures, he looked at it and he said, "Who's that?" And I said, "That's me." And he said, "This is you?" And what it was I had grown my beard and shaved it, trimmed it, like this with a goatee. And
the kind of thin lines.
Yeah. And I had been working out for quite a while.
Yeah.
I was wearing a slingshot T-shirt for the picture. And then I had a black sash that I put around. And I took the picture profile, and so I looked a lot more muscular than I really am.
Yeah.
And so he looked at the picture and he said, "This is you." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Hold on a minute." And then he went, and when he came back, Taylor was with him.
Wow.
And Taylor held out the picture and he said, "This is really you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, I'm going to make your life difficult. I'm going to give you 6 scenes and I want you to memorize them because we're doing a screen test tomorrow."
Holy shit.
Yeah. So I went home and, prepared.
Yeah.
Came in. They had kind of like a cell. First, we did the Onda scene where I have to stop the meeting because it's getting out of control. And so as the guys were getting amped up, I stopped it by saying, I don't even remember what I said, but I used some caló. And then I started talking about pre-Columbian culture. So then we finished that scene. And then Taylor had me do the scene with Miklo, where I tell him, and he brought me aside and he said,
and is that Damien Chapa at that point?
This is Damien Chapa. Yes, he's already been cast.
Yeah.
And he said to me, "I want to know what this kid has inside of him. So do me a favor, get me something out of him." And so as we were doing the scene, dialogue verbatim, all of a sudden, when he got to feeling sorry for himself, I literally grabbed him and I slapped him. Actually slapped him in the audition.
Wow.
And I could see he turned literally red, beet red, and he wanted to kill me. But he didn't. He stayed in character, and we continued with the scene. Then afterwards, Taylor called cut, and I went over and he said, "Thank you. That's what I wanted to see."
But wait, did anybody explain to Damien that Taylor told you to...
No, but no, but then later on, Damien said, "What you did," he said, "thank you, because I really needed that." He said, "I wanted to beat the shit out of you, but..."
I was going to say.
And he probably could have,
So much of that part, his arc really, or his drive, is around the idea of elevating Damien Chapa's character, building him up, where it's like you have this power in you to be this person that's so much greater than the person you are. And so much of that is communicated through the language of Chicanismo, La Raza, and unifying black and brown power together.
Correct.
Was that in the script? Because that's so much of your background that I imagine you were able to at least, show that lived inside you and was something you could kind of play with.
Yes, again, it's very familiar to my experience in both my professional and my personal life. Taylor was very clear about the freedom that he was giving us to explore and, if need be, to improvise. He said, you guys know this better than I do, so don't be afraid to push it.
So you would do these takes and he knew what he wanted, but he would let you fill even the language you were able to sort of make your own.
And not only that, he's a great observer of the actor. He doesn't force you into doing what he wants. He allows you the room to do what you need to do in order for him to get what he wants. Let me put it this way. He gets what he needs. Once he gets what he needs, then he can get what he wants.
Yeah. And how much of that, I'm trying to sort of like gauge, there's these great scenes where you're like, I think even the first scene where you meet Damian Chapa's character and they bring him into your cell, which is like heavily guarded. And you start talking to him about like the origins of sort of Latinidad. And he's playing this character that's torn between his Latin identity. He's not really torn. He wants to identify with his Latin side, but people keep pulling him
in both directions.
In both directions and trying to force him to be white because that's the color of his skin.
That's where the power is.
And that's where the existing power is, right? And so you film that in a prison.
San Quintin,
San Quentin. Was, scary? Not scary? How'd you feel?
I've never been in a prison. I visited jails, but I've never been in a working prison at that level. So the choice to go there, taking the role, was obviously considering that. And I asked myself, do I want to put myself through that? And I couldn't think about it too long or I would have said no. So once I agreed to do the project, I said, whatever happens is going to happen. And so my first experience going there was looming over, the bay is this monolithic structure with iron and brick and weapons and people that, have 1,000-yard stairs. And walking through the first iron door into a sally port with bulletproof glass, facing another iron door, and they hand you the piece of paper where you basically sign your life away. That says that you understand that if you were taken hostage, that the authorities will do nothing to secure your release.
Wow.
So there's nothing you can do once you sign that. And I signed it, and the next door opened, and there I am inside.
Did they have you wear vests like to distinguish you?
First time I walked in there, I walked in as a civilian because we were scouting the location prior to filming, before filming. We walked the lower yard, the upper yard. We looked at some cells, and then we left. And the next time I went to work. And right away, we went through a process of orientation with the inmates. And Taylor was very deliberate about the approach because we understand, and he understands, that there is a regional conflict ongoing between North and South.
Norteños y sureños.
Sureños, correct. Yeah. Distinguished by colors, red and blue. So he brought us into this room, and all the inmates that were going to be our individual leaders clique were on one side of the room and we were on the other. Taylor got on top of a chair. He's wearing his usual red pullover shirt. And he says to them, I know that you guys have an issue with color. And let me explain to you why I wear red. He said, when I make a movie, nobody on the set gets to wear red but me. Because whenever anybody comes to the set and they're looking for the director, they say, the guy in red. I'm not doing it to offend anybody, and I'm not doing it to show you off or anything. This is the way I work. And if you have a problem with that, that's not going to stop me from doing what I normally do. So basically, he earned their respect by being completely open about it.
Transparent, but not
Completely transparent.
not deferential.
But not deferential. Yes, he was directing.
Yeah.
He was the director. And everybody was secure in the outcome of it because nothing happened.
Yeah.
Nobody said anything. Nobody shook their head. I was watching the inmates, and all of them just tuned in to what he was saying. And it was okay. I even saw a couple of nods here and there.
Did you interact with any of the inmates?
Eventually, yes. We were told we were not allowed to give them anything, a cookie, a gum, or anything at all. It's another world from the outside, and there's only certain things that keep you alive in there.
Yeah.
And one of them is respect. That's the ultimate currency, is respect. And it's either explained to you when you talk with liaisons that are either part of them or have been assigned by their administration, and also sometimes by interaction with the inmates themselves. One incident in particular that I recall was we went to work, and again, everything that goes in and out of that prison has to be counted. Every screwdriver, every makeup brush, everything has to be counted in, and it has to be counted out. So it's got to be accounted for. So time consuming. We were limited by time there. It's a working prison. They have their counts every so often. And if anything happens, they go into lockdown. So you can't work. We walked on the set and there was nobody around. They have a basketball court. So 2 or 3 of us were playing basketball. Guard comes over and he says, "Gentlemen, how are you guys doing? If you notice anything strange?" He says, "Yeah, where is everybody?" "Well, somebody took care of business and they're in lockdown. And so we don't know how long it's going to take, but just, be forewarned that when the doors open, everybody's out, it's back to normal, and someone may want to retaliate. So be aware." Inmate comes over to us and says, "If anything happens, get behind us." They were going to protect us.
Fascinating. So the way you talk about character, it sounds like you really think from the point of view of the character. There's different schools of acting for folks who don't know. There's people who stay in character all the time. And then there's people who are like the character doesn't exist,
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, take, for example, Montana. Obviously, my due diligence could not include being, murdering somebody and being in prison.
No.
So I had to do a lot of reading. I had to do a lot of personal involvement of background, farm worker, whatnot, that went into the character. I have a sister who's a psychologist, and so she's helped me a lot in terms of preparing characters and also in stuff that I write, the psychological and the emotional aspects of the characters. We did a numerological chart for the character. We did an astrological chart. We did a whole psychological why did he make this choice? Why did he make that choice? That's the only thing that I have control of. Taylor has control of everything else, but my work is the only thing that I can control. And it doesn't matter whether I'm working in an independent movie with no budget or student film, or I'm working for Steven Spielberg or Taylor Hackford. My work has to speak for who I am. And that's the only thing that I can control. And if I do my best, then I'm content. So even in auditions, my audition could be the only time I ever get a chance to do that role. So why not do it?
Fully.
Correct.
Well, on that note, I'll just say I love your work. I thought you did a tremendous job in this film. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been fun.
That's our show, Vatos Locos Forever. Now, I know if you're a fan of Blood In, Blood Out, you probably don't like narcs. But what about spies? Specifically, spy kids? Next week, I'll talk to the OG spy kid herself, Alexa Penavega, and the woman behind the scenes of the little blockbuster that could, producer Elizabeth Abian. More Than a Movie Season 2 was produced by Chloe Tagliagambe with the help of Reynolds Gutierrez and Veronica Hernandez in partnership with iHeart's My Cultura Podcast Network. Hosted by me, Alex Fumero. Edited by Rose Reed and Chloe Tagliagambe with the help of Saida Quevedo. Executive producers are Carmen Graterol, Rose Reed, Isaac Lee, and me, Alex Fumero. Sound design by Gonzalo Messi. Original music by Golden Minds, Darko, and IM. Recorded at JTB Studios and Vaudeville Sound. Our executive producers at iHeart are Giselle Bances and Arlene Santana. For more My Cultura podcasts, listen to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite shows.